Hi, y'all. Welcome back to part two, unraveling, unfolding of my childhood, but now my before and after of coming to Christ. Listen up. It's going to be so awesome. I can't wait for God's glory to show in all of this. Oh, I'm so excited. So, if you haven't watched part one, go watch part one or listen to part one and then now listen up to part two. So, last episode, I left off on going to college, being super duper depressed. And I was at my second school at the time and I didn't know God. It was really, really hard. But God has planted seeds so many times along the way and is the coolest thing to see, especially like being a first generation Christian coming to Christ and then seeing like the unraveling of like God's plan is like the coolest thing ever because it makes me think like, man, this could only be God. It's not my own strength. It's not my own ideas. It's not my own doing. It's God's doing and his strength and his heart. And it was my obedience of like, God, I can't do life without you. So let's kind of pick up where we left off. I talked about my second year of college kind of a little bit briefly. I ended up transferring to another school from the school I was at in Connecticut to Belmont University in Nashville. Mind you, I grew up in Nashville, so it was like I thought I would be the happiest I'd ever been in my life, and I couldn't be more sad, okay? I had some really bad roommates. It was just like, and I was not in any place to like make the most of the situation either. Like I was just not happy, okay? And at this point I'd just given up dance, so like I knew a part of my life was kind of like not part of my life, but my life was over. No, like a part of my childhood kind of came to an end, right? Because at that point, I'm like, okay, well, now what? You know, God, like, what are you doing? Even though at the time I wasn't following God, like right now I think back to that time and I'm like, I would have said that. I would have been like, God, what are you doing? I touched base and I want this to kind of talk about what my beliefs were then. I talked a little bit briefly about how I started tapping into like new age spirituality, which if you don't know or if you aren't aware, it's a lot of like astrology and like numbers and like angel numbers, quote unquote. A lot of tarot cards, a lot of just witchcraft. And I never really dabbled into that doing it, but I was always watching tarot card readings. I was always learning about my astrology and the moon and the stars and this like what there's like this like at first it didn't seem like evil practices and now when I look back it's evil practices. So I mean anything other than like the Lord is evil practices, but I was really dabbling into that and it was scary. It was weird. I ended up just like believing that for a long time. I was believing in all of that for a long time, but I didn't really talk about it to other people. I did say like I did remember like I would always like be intrigued to like talk about it to friends, but you know, I didn't really think it was like a huge part of my life yet. Like I said, later on after that like first semester at Belmont, it was summer. Earlier that year, I actually applied to the Disney College program, which if you don't know what that is, like it is so awesome. Literally the best semester of my life. I loved it so much. I met some of the best people ever. I worked in Epcot in merchandise. It was so fun. Although, this is the funniest part, I transferred schools again. So like when I went to Belmont, my major was entertainment industry studies. And I only did that because my brother-in-law was like, hey, like you should totally do that. He's a musician. He did music business there. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. That sounds like something I want to do. Because in my previous episode talking about my upbringing, I actually ended up like going to media because I knew I wanted to be in entertainment in some way. I just didn't know what that looked like. So it's crazy to see how God kind of turns things full circle. It's pretty cool. But let's continue. So I ended up transferring into the University of Central Florida, which is the biggest school in the US, UCF, go Knights. I didn't really get much involved with the football because I was only there for like 3 years. And one of the years I was literally home the whole year. Anyways, let's continue. So I ended up applying there. They had entertainment management as a major there, which was a part of the hospitality school. So I actually applied there and I got in a month. Like they accepted me. So I transferred in. But during my Disney internship, I did all online school. But even though I was like literally 10 minutes from there, I did all online. But I worked full time in Disney and that was really fun. So fast forward, like I mentioned, I was rooming with someone that was a follower of Christ and like still didn't feel like called to know the Lord. But it is funny because soon I'll get into like when I did come back to Christ, how she kind of fell into my path again. It was really cool though, because like working at Disney, like it was so fun. I made tons of friends all over the country, all over the world, and it was just a fun experience. Fast forward, that ends. Once it was over on January 1st, I didn't really have a plan moving forward, right? My housing fell through there. I didn't want to renew my in like my college program because I did want to finish school. I was like really excited to get done with school and I still had 2 more years because when you transfer 1,000 times like I did, your credits aren't going to transfer well, especially from private schools. So I was like, I knew I had like 3 more years or like 2.5 more years. So I ended up just moving home, which actually worked in my favor because God had such a plan in that. It was actually 2020. January 2020, I moved home. I got a job at Fabletics and I worked and did online school that entire semester into summer. And obviously everything shut down anyways, but I still was getting paid for my job because that's what they decided to do for their employees. I got to still do school at home. I was living it up, living rent free, living here at home with my parents. And it was such a great time for me. Honestly, I couldn't have gotten more blessed with that situation. Around that time, I actually started doing TikTok. That's an era, guys. This is where we get into the deep nitty-gritty. I talked about it a little bit in my first episode, which you should definitely listen to because I do talk about how the podcast came about and this is a part of it. But I had a inkling that I was supposed to start a TikTok and I did. And it got fun for me. I was like, this is where I belong. I'm going to post funny content. Growing up, I was never the loudest kid in the room. Actually, I was very shy. And so like throughout my years of growing up, I thought maybe I needed to change a few things. And I went to college and I completely transformed my personality. I was like trying to be the funniest in the friend group. And I was like, well, I'm trying too hard. But I really loved to be the most energetic. Like that was my goal. Like caffeine in a person, I wanted that to be me so bad. It still is me, and I actually really do believe that is who I truly am, but I was just over the top, like to the max. I just wanted attention all the time. And so that brings me to my TikTok creation, right? I created a TikTok account, not even the thought of like, okay, I want to build a following, but eventually I was like, yeah, like I used to be a dancer. I love like cracking jokes. Whatever. I am so happy that TikTok no longer exists, but that was my thing. I got to like 100 something thousand followers. So 100K, I'm over here sitting with 100K and I'm like, how did this happen, right? I built this like platform and it wasn't what I wanted though. Like I remember feeling deep down like the crowd I was building was like, I wasn't proud of it. I was actually ashamed of it because like if my family were to ever find videos like that of me, I would be so embarrassed. I just didn't post godly content. I obviously didn't know Christ yet, but I didn't post godly content. It was very vulgar. I was cursing all the time. I thought cursing was so funny. Like, I remember the first time I said a curse word in ninth grade, and I was like, and everyone cracked up laughing. So I was like really trying to conform to the world. So like TikTok before Christ was like conforming to the world. TikTok after Christ is living for Christ, making him known, not myself. So anyways, I did not like that TikTok account at all. I hope it crashes and burns in hell. Anyways, I'm not proud, whatever. So I really just, at that time, like in college, I was just like, okay, I need to stop this once and for all. But like, I never felt called yet to get off TikTok. But like, I really wasn't proud. But I knew like I had a following. So I was like, well, I'm going to do something about it. So like, I remember that was the time the world loved me the most because they're like, oh, she's so funny. She's so funny. Oh my gosh, she's doing all this crazy stuff. Like it like made people feel better about themselves. It's kind of like what I said in my last podcast. Like when you're not speaking truth into someone, like it's just like reinforcing that people should just follow the world. And that's what I was doing. Like I was conforming to society and people cheered that on. They loved to see me walking against the Lord. That was something that people admired. They were like, yeah, she's what's the word? She's reassuring that I'm doing a good thing by not walking with God. Like it just was so evident that I was walking against God, not with God. And like people loved how crazy and vulgar I was. It was gross. I'm not even kidding. I'm actually disgusted whenever I think about it. But anyways, so fast forward, I get to UCF officially. Okay. This is where the fun part comes in because this is actually where I start coming to Christ. When it comes to me coming to Christ, I genuinely, when I look back at this, it's so funny because it's come full circle and I'm so grateful for, well, honestly, like my mom was the one to kind of initiate this for me. So, because people are everything. Your circle is everything. Like that dictates, like I've always been told, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. And I'll tell you what, this is an exact image of that. So basically, it's like midsummer and I have to choose my roommates to where I'm like moving in at college and like finally things are opening back up. I'm so excited, whatever. And I remember I was in the portal and I was like going to find roommates or whatever. And I click on a girl, she like messaged me through the portal and she's like, hey, like, would you be willing to move in with us into a 4-person apartment on campus? And I was like, sure. I get in a group chat with these ladies and then they're like, oh, we found one more person. I'm going to add her to the chat and we're all chit chatting. But I'll never forget, like, this is the glory of God right now, actually, because all 4 of us have had a walk with God since we all met. Like, it's actually the coolest thing ever to see it all kind of unfold. But I'm getting chills right now because it's such a beautiful story. Anyways, so I like have more conversations with them and they're like, oh, we all go to church. Like, we should all go to church together. And they're like saying they're all Christians. And I'm like, oh gosh. Like, I was so like, nah, not about it. Not about it. It ain't me. Because I remember going to a Christian church, non-denominational church, and I'm like, this isn't it. But I remember telling my mom, I was like, Mom, they're all Christian. She's like, you make it sound like it's a bad thing. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. And she's like, just give it a shot. Like, just go check it out. Having people that go to church is like not a bad thing, Alyssa. And I'm like, okay, whatever. At the time, mind you, I'm still like new age spirituality. And I really believed in manifestation. So I then move into college. It's not even like 3 days into living with them. we are like all really close. Like it was the coolest thing ever. Mind you, like none of them talked much about God, but we all were like bonding and like I could feel a difference and like it just felt like girls that are just for you, not against you. And I finally felt like, okay, maybe I just found like a good group of girls. Cause like at the time, I didn't even include when I moved to Florida. So back up because we literally moved to Florida. I talked in my last episode when I moved to Florida. I moved to Florida in 2018, which was right before I got diagnosed with PCOS. Right when my year was like, that was like the worst time in my life when I look back. And we also moved to a new state where I had no friends. So, like, literally every time we went on break for school, I came home, I'd have no friends. Like, it was so hard for me. So like coming to a college where like, well, I did make a lot of friends at Disney, but like all those friends like moved or whatever. And like these girls felt like, okay, like they're all Florida girls. And I just felt like we could all bond, right? And that's exactly what happened. So this is 2020, end of 2020 fall. And at the time, I actually had this guy friend from Connecticut and he's like, oh my gosh, you go to UCF. And he said he had a guy friend. So one day I was like, yeah, sure. Like I'll go meet him. And they lived in our apartment area. And I went to meet him with my roommates. And literally like I was so delulu. I'll never forget like at that time, like when I was my new age spirituality era, I remember their apartment number was like 111 and I was like, oh my gosh, my future husband lives in this apartment because I kept seeing that number everywhere. Fast forward, I ended up actually getting in a relationship with one of the roommates and I thought he was my future husband and it couldn't be farther from that. I was actually I want to save that for an actual episode on its own. But like to tell you the truth, like that is like honestly the catapult, that situation, that relationship we were in was that catapult that got me to know the Lord deeper. So stay tuned for that. But at the time, like I remember getting in a relationship quickly and I'd never been in a relationship before, like an official relationship. And this was a very sinful situation. Like it wasn't a, oh yes, like I found a guy that was really loving and caring. Like it was all sugar coated in a sense of like it was from, I don't want to say it was from the enemy, but like it wasn't what God chose for me. It was just a false representation of it, of what I thought was for me. So fast forward, and mind you, listen, hands up, I wish the best on every guy talked to. It's just, it wasn't for me. And I want to preface that because I don't want anyone to get this false perception that it was like, oh, I was in this, you're saying, oh, like you were like not guilty for anything in a relationship or like, I don't know, like people are like, oh, yeah, he was the worst. Like he's so toxic. It's like, I don't ever want to come across as that. Like there were a lot of problems that went both ways. Like there was never something that I've gone through where I was this like perfect individual, although I can flat out say it wasn't healthy for me. I'll leave it at that. So mind you, I thought that was like the love I wanted to be in, right? So fast forward, I'm like, okay, I want to be in this relationship, whatever. But at that time, my roommates were like, oh my gosh, guys, guess what? Elevation Church opened up a campus here finally after COVID, and they're doing it at this hotel. And this is where I said like my old roommate from Disney comes into the picture because she actually was present for that first time coming back to church ever. And I'll never forget, like I was dreading going. I was like, I don't want to go. But all my roommates wanted to go so badly. So I decided, put your pride aside, Alyssa. There's a reason for this. So I went, met up with my old roommate. Unreal. I remember my first time going to church again. I wore this like really cropped top with like these jeans that were ripped up. And like, it's crazy the difference between what I thought was like really good to wear versus now, knowing that modest is hottest. Like, oh my goodness, gosh, night and day. But like, I remember going to church that first time and like, I felt something like really deep. I don't know how to describe it, but I just felt God like kind of like tapping me. I felt God tapping me and being like, follow me. And I remember they played the song Graves into Gardens, and I was like, oh, I love this song. But like, I also found worship to be really cringy. I actually didn't even like worship at all. Like, I liked the sermon part. And like, when Stephen Furtick spoke again, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. Like, first time I ever went to a church like this, it was him speaking. So it just kind of came full circle. Like, elevation has been planted throughout my life, and I can't even describe it. I, when I can't even describe it. Anyways, so fast forward, I find myself like that, knowing that like there was something God like was kind of like tapping on me to like kind of be a part of, but I didn't listen to it, of course. But I'd stayed in this sinful relationship, which really kept me farther and farther and farther away from God. It wasn't even that, like, again, I say this and I mean this. When someone doesn't know the Lord, they don't know what they don't know. Okay? Like, I would never judge somebody who's not walked with Christ. Thinking about my old self, my Christian friends, I had this one friend from Connecticut who just like was a seed planted for me as well, like really spreaded the good news and like never pushed it upon me. And even these roommates, like, I remember the time where I was like, oh, I really want to know God deeper. And they were like, this is like what we've been praying for. And I'll never forget moments like that, because it's like no one pushed me to do it, but like God being so gentle and whispering and telling me that this was what he wanted for me. And so I thank God. I thank God for those girls that I lived with. I thank God for all the seeds planted along the way, because it all brought me to him deeper. And I can't even imagine my life without him, right? So, long story short, the year goes by, it's 2021. I come back to college, and at that point, like, I had this like inkling to like really just like reinvent who I am. And I remember getting a gym membership at Crunch. I was like, I'm going to start being serious about my fitness journey. At the time, like, I was just not as fit. I was going through a really hard time with my hormones. As I said, I had PCOS whenever. But I really felt like this was like a new year. 2021 is a really monumental year for me. It really is. So, long story short, fast forward, me and my roommates start going to church more often. We actually started going to Elevation still, and then also a young adults group. And I'll never forget, like, it was so wild to me that, every time I went to church, I had this like emotional dumping. Like, it was like, they say it happens in like chiropractic work. I've gone to the chiropractor many times for my health, but you have this emotional release. Well, that's what church did to me. Like, when I would go to church and be in the body and with him and his spirit, I literally would just dump all of these tears. It was kind of a monumental time in my life, and I remember it deeply, because these were the first moments of coming to know the Lord, and I was really soaking it all up. Like, I was able to be in this moment of, I need to do something about my life. And I was in this relationship still, and I would see other families with their significant others, and I'd see something that I craved. I wanted that relationship. I wanted a man of God with me. I wanted someone leading me well. And like, the more and more I learned about God through church and just my young adults group, like, I wanted that so bad. The more and more I felt more distant from the relationship I was in, the more and more I was more aware of what was going on. And it's a very scary thing to be in something with someone that is not pushing you towards the Lord, like against God in a sense. And it was very terrifying to me. So anyways, I want to keep continuing on. During the semester, I got in the best shape of my life. I was leaning into God more. I actually started reading my first book ever since, like, honestly, when I was young, Live by Sadie Robb. It's the pink one. I love that book. It was beautiful. I'll never forget, I was like roasting, like reading and like Christian books and everything it's like so funny. Like, it's like I get proven wrong every time. I'm that person that's like, I don't like that. And then I try it and I'm like, oh, this is really good. But I am that girl. Sorry, guys. I am. So I remember opening it up and I read the first like 3 pages and I'm in tears. Like I'm in tears because for the first time, like I felt the love of God. I felt God literally tapping on my shoulder saying like, you're here to be original. Like you're not here to impress other people. You're not here to be this perfect version. You're not here to, you know, just be walking in sin because you think that's the best you can get. Like I remember being in a relationship that I was in and thinking this is the best I'm going to get because I'm me and everything bad happens to me. Like I'll never forget like playing the victim in my life and just always being a martyr, and like I was sick of it. Like I saw Sadie Robb talking like in a sermon once and I was like, she has a glow that I want so bad and I don't know how to get it, but I'm thinking it's God. So let me just try that first. And it is that. So like it's not a secret, it's God. And yeah, I teared up so much. There was this one time I need to spill the tea on this like God moment I had. I was really hurting, you know, I was really hurting. I was living a life that I wasn't proud of. And I was really just like, God, what is going on? And at that time, I was really struggling in one of my classes. Everything was still online kind of because of COVID. So I was in this astronomy class because like I had to retake a science course because none of my credits transferred, whatever. I had to retake it. So I'm taking this exam that was like online. You couldn't cheat at all. They made sure you couldn't cheat. And I was so angry that I didn't know how to take this test. Like it was so bad. So I was taking it and I was like, this is awful. Like I was crying. I'll never forget, y'all. I literally started crying. Like you could see on the video because it records your face while you're taking the exam. I'm like, there's like streams coming down, like a literal crocodile tear just sitting on my cheek. I'm like having a panic attack while taking this exam. I remember taking this exam and I was so defeated after. It shows you exactly what you got right after the test. And I got like a 45 or something. And I remember this was like the one test I had to take in order to like get my grade to be a passing grade. And I had failed. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And I literally remember I shut my laptop and I started sobbing. And I was like, I literally put everything down and I started crying so hard. And I'm like, God, give me a sign. I can't believe I said that, but I didn't know how to pray then, honestly. There's no right way to pray, but I didn't know what to say. So I was just like, God, give me a sign that everything's going to be okay because I really need to graduate. I need things to be okay. And I was just like, all right, well, whatever. I remember I waited a little bit and I went out to my kitchen and I saw my roommate, Jess, and I was like, girl, same one who named this podcast, love you. I came out to the kitchen and I was like, do you want to go get cookies at Publix and make them with me? What will make me feel better? That food always. So we went to Publix. I was like, just still distraught, but I was there and I was like, I need to grab a few other things. So she went a different direction. I went another direction and I'm in like the produce section grabbing like fruit and stuff. And these two guys walked by me. And I noticed one of them looked at me and I'm like, oh gosh, like at the time I was in like kind of a controlling relationship. So like if a guy looked at me, like I would get like no, don't look at me. Like I get really uncomfortable because I was just like so on guard. Like I didn't want to have to explain anything to my ex because he was so nervous about me like being around other guys. So like I like looked the other way and then they walked by me and then out of nowhere one of them walks right back over to me. And this guy was like in his probably like early 30s. I don't even know if he was probably in his late 20s, early 30s. Came up to me and he's like, hey, do you need help with anything? Like I was struggling. I was like carrying a lot of stuff and I was like, no, I'm good. Thanks. Like quickly look away. He's like, okay. Starts taking steps away from me, comes right back. And I was like, oh my gosh, what? Like, what does he want? Like, is he going to ask for my number? I don't know. I was like really nervous and I couldn't read his shirt, but him and his friend had on a very similar shirt. And I never like, I'm gonna probably start crying when I tell this story, but like I literally, like they had on a matching shirt. It was like something like about God, but he came over to me. And this is what I mean by like being obedient to the Spirit. This is crazy. Mind you, this is an hour and a half after I took that exam. I failed it, whatever. And I was like, God, give me a sign. 1 hour later, 9 p.m. on a like literal like Thursday night at Publix, he comes over to me and he goes, I just want to tell you, God loves you and everything is going to be okay. And I can confirm, like, everything was okay. Like, not even just speaking about the test, like, everything was okay. Everything ended up being okay. Even out of all the trials of life, everything has been okay since that moment. And so I sit there in shock. Like, I'm actually kind of weirded out because I'm like, were you in the room with me? Like, were you hiding in my room? Were you watching me on the cam? What's going on? And so I'm freaked out. I'm a little weirded out. I'm like, okay, this is a little odd. Weird. Okay. And he's like, no, I just feel the need to tell you that. God's got you. Can I ask what your name is and what you do? And I was like, well, kind of weirded out. Like, is he going to ask for my number still? Like, what's the vibe? So I'm like, oh, well, my name's Alyssa. I go to college and, I'm not doing well in a class and I really need to pass, whatever. And he's like, can I pray over you? So he grabs my head and he starts praying over me. In the midst of this, my roommate finds me and she's like standing from a distance, like, what's going on? And he walks away and he goes, everything's going to be okay. Walks away into thin air, just disappears. I have no idea where he went. Like, it felt like an angel just came down from heaven, then floated away. And I'm like, what in the freaking freak just happened? Thank you, God. But what just happened? So I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I'm confused. I'm kind of tearing up, but kind of not, because I'm kind of weirded out. And my roommate, because at the time I was like, what does prayer even mean? Like, prayer growing up, when people say, oh, I'm praying for you, it sounded like an insult. And like, this was more than that. This was like, oh, someone actually like came out of nowhere and just prayed over me and walked away. And it just was like, wow, God's people exist. And so my roommate came up to me, just like, what just happened? And I was like, he like just came up to me and asked me if he could pray over me and told me like everything was going to be okay. And like, I told her this story before I like left the apartment and she's like, girl, I'd be crying if I were you. And I was like, I don't even know what to do. That's never happened to me before. But I tell you that story because literally like it was seeds like that were planted that didn't make any sense. But there were so many God moments like that in that season of my life, like God saying, walk with me. Like, don't hold back. Walk with me. And it's just been incredible to like see how that's unraveled everything, because since that God moment, like, I went through a season where I was kind of long distance with my ex-boyfriend at the time. And like, honestly, I was going through a really hard time. And I wasn't nourishing my body to the best that I could be. And all I cared about was like this image. I wanted to be skinny and perfect and all these things. And like, I had this like false perception of Christianity. And I thought like life was just gonna be perfect after coming to Christ. And that couldn't be farther from the truth of it. Like, life is gonna actually be even harder. And that's because you're a threat to the enemy. And spiritual warfare does exist no matter where you're at in your journey with Christ. Like, it does exist, but it's learning how to pull up the armor of God and knowing that no weapon can be formed against you. Wait, sorry. I'm like hallucinating. I didn't say that right. No weapon formed against you will prosper. And so I just genuinely like know since then, like, life has not been easy, but I thought that when you gave your life to Christ, like, life would be easy. So anyways, I still was in my worldly secular relationship. I actually was in that for 2 years, but there was a moment where I came home during Thanksgiving break that same year, 2021, and I was in my bed, and I talked about this in my first podcast episode, but I literally gave my life to Christ in my room at 3 a.m. after watching a girl's podcast. And that's why podcasts hold such a special place in my heart, because if I could be touched by a podcast to really follow God, then someone else can too through mine. And I bought my first Bible that night, and it just had changed everything. I remember coming back to college, and like, it was around the time I first started this podcast. And like, I remember telling my ex-boyfriend, like, I wanted to stop being sinful. I wanted to start walking with God. I wanted him to come along with me. and he didn't want that. And so like it just was like a fight with my flesh and a fight for God, like in the midst of it. Like I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, lukewarm, not knowing like what depth meant with the Lord. And I knew I had to get rid of a few things along the way. And that was that relationship, which I'll talk about eventually. And there was a lot of emotional baggage left from that. Like it was like, oh my gosh, laundry that's piled up and not knowing where to start. Like that's how that relationship felt to me. So it was just a constant, like, there was a lot to unpack, a lot of traumas I built up in that relationship to unpack, because in my eyes, I thought maybe I needed to have a perfect body for a guy to love me still, or I needed to maintain this perfect image in order for a guy to love me. And I just felt like I was constantly trying to prove myself to him and trying to be this perfect person for the world and him and my family and like all these things. And I just gave it to God. I said, I'm done. I'm sick of this. Like, I seriously am done. It was just this constant desire to be well known and liked, and there is a difference between wanting to be liked and just being loved where you're at, because Christ loves you in every area of your life, at any season in your life, where you're at. And like I never really understood that. And so I ended up like slowly but surely throughout the journey of my life, like once I graduated college, you know I was at my most perfect worldly self, I'd say. Like it was the most secular self I'd been, although I did claim I was a Christian. I was like, I'm a Christian girl. I started sharing Christian stuff on Instagram, but I was like really split between two worlds. And I remember like I was chasing this ideal perfect body. I was chasing this ideal perfect life. I had so many things, so many external things that became my identity and defined my worth. It wasn't God that defined my worth at the time. It was, how many degrees do I have? How many certifications do I have? What's the number on the scale? How much clothes do I have? How much money do I have? How far I've been in my relationship? How close I was to getting married? Like all these silly, worldly desires that dictated whether or not I was worthy and whether or not like who I was enough. Like I always thought like having this, like I became a certified personal trainer, and I also graduated college at the same time, and it felt like I was on cloud nine. And I was like starting to really like within that last year of college, which was 2021 to 2022, I really was like opening up my heart to like wanting to like be closer to God, but also still following the world for what it was that I wanted to be, this perfect person on social media. And I really can't even describe to you how night and day everything was. Once I graduated college, it was like, man, like I'm living an adult life now. I have to get a full-time job. And so I did full-time personal training for a little bit. That was around the time I ended my relationship, and I actually did like really release that to God. And it felt like a weight was lifted off, even though it was like delayed obedience. I should have ended it a year before that, or even right when it started. But I literally like, I felt so free. Like I just can't believe like how much I allowed myself to get so out of alignment from God because I was trying to please the world and please a man. It was wild. It really was. And so at that time, like I still was attention seeking. I was trying to fit into this box. I wanted to be just like this perfect girl. And like, that's when I started just trying to like hide it on social media, that like I was hurting and like feeling all these things, but I was also trying to make it look like I was living the perfect life. Like I would constantly, like my hangouts with my friends were just going to coffee shops and taking pictures, which I still do enjoy, but the heart posture behind it and anything you do, like you can do anything in this life, right? If your heart posture is not pure in Christ, it will not be fruitful and prosper. It will not be a good planted seed. And I want to talk about being planted because my word of the year, I guess my phrase of the year is being planted. And Psalms 1 verse 3, let me read it to you. It exemplifies just my made new self. It says, oh, where is it? Sorry, verse 3. Sorry. Psalms 1 verse 3. They are like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do. And is that not a perfect description of what life is like with the Lord when you're planted in good soil with a good seed, able to prosper and become the most fruitful tree you've ever been? You know, I talked about this on my TikTok, and this was a video that actually did pretty good, but like, you don't want a journey that is not a slow burn, right? Because you see these trees outside that have lasted forever. That's because they were planted in good soil. And that verse is so fire. Like, that verse is so fire, because those are the trees that last forever. And that is what life is like with Christ, is that it's the trees that just last forever. Like, wind can come, rain can come down, your tree will stay up. That's God, right? That's a seed planted in God's word with some good soil and just a beautiful growth, So anyways, let's talk about just this aftermath, right? I came home from college, and I remember getting in touch with an old friend who's like my literal sister now. Her name's Taylor. Love you. And I reached out to her, even though we hadn't talked in like a long time. We worked at Fabletics together, but I remember reaching out to her, and I was like, hey girl, like, and mind you, I just came home from college. I left my radio job, which I talked about briefly in my first episode. I was working radio, and I kind of left that job because I moved away from Orlando, whatever. And I came home, and I was like, well, here we are. What do? I have no friends here, nothing. And can I just tell you the ways that God's shown up since I moved here back home? Not knowing anybody. I talked about that. I did not know anybody, did not grow up here. But between working where I did at the gym and also getting involved in the church I started going to, I now know like so many people in this area, actually maybe too many people, but like what a blessing. God is so good. So she and I went to church together, my first time ever going to the church I go to. And it was such a blessing. I actually met one of my good friends too at the gym before I ever worked there. And she and I were talking, and she just came up to me and complimented me. Her name's Alex, and I love her so much. She's a big part of why I started going to the church I go to now. And she like came up to me, and I saw her shirt said Yahweh, and I was like, I love your shirt. Oh my gosh. And we just started talking about God, and like, it was just a crazy moment because of her, like, I really have grown a lot in my relationship with God. And so God starts bringing in all these people. And this was right before I ended that relationship with my ex-boyfriend. And just all these people started coming into my life. And it just was such a beautiful moment, because it was like God provides when you need it, like right when you need it. So I just felt like, man, like I was finally walking in the direction I wanted to. And this just shows you, like, God knows. God has your best interest at heart. Like, I have full trust in the Lord. I go my ways. I have disappointments sometimes, because that's just human nature to do that. But God is so good. He always knows. He always knows. And so I was really putting my focus in like those friendships, allowing those to be fruitful. I had a lot of friendships I had along the way that I had to weed out. A lot of men I met along the way that I had to weed out that were so not in alignment with God. And so eventually, like, I did end up leaving that job at the gym I was at. Just a lot of spiritual warfare, but not in the way of like you would think. Like, I ended up developing another health problem and autoimmune disease, and I just felt God kind of pulling me away from there. So a lot of these trials were happening, right? Kind of like provoking this like faith I never had. And then eventually, like, God was slowly pulling me out of where I was. And it was such a beautiful moment for me, because it was like God was saving me. God was saving me. And I had no idea. And mind you, like, I'd already given my life to Christ, but I was so walking lukewarm. Never forget. I really hope I can find this journal. Yes. Okay, there's so many different things in here. I don't even know what that is, but it says, I'll never forget. literally like January 1st of 2023, I said, first day of the new year, I'm so blessed to say I've made it to another year. I really want this year to show my growth. I went through many mental struggles this past year. I want to continue staying strong. My mental state is hard right now. My social media and fitness career is number one right now. I wanted that to like go off, and soon podcast, which this was 2 years ago, which is crazy. I also need to maintain my fitness journey. So much is going on this year. God, may I ask for the strength and keep pushing through and achieving these goals. I want to radiate light. God, use me as your vessel to share your greatness. And then I remember the one thing, like my New Year's resolution was grow in depth with the Lord. And I think it's crazy because God has turned like what I thought was to happen. It's come full circle. And so I want to wrap up this episode by saying like there is just such beauty in, asking God for depth with him and seeing him turn it all around. I mean, I just like 2 Corinthians 5:17, the old you has passed away and the new you has begun. Like that's how I've seen like everything kind of unfold in this past, I'd say, well, that was January 1st of 2023. And that's when everything started happening, which I want to talk about in really like a lot of episodes to come. But just so you know, like here I am today, 2024, end of 2024, the most joyful, closest to God I've ever been, spiritually healthy. Maybe those idols have fallen because I really did put a lot of my focus in the idols of this world. All the things I was focused on, just being this like super perfect image, like none of that ever got me anywhere. It was all burnout. I was burning out. I was not able to walk in the fullness of God because I was focusing so deeply on these things that don't matter. And I brought up Ecclesiastes in my first episode because Ecclesiastes talks about how everything is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Nothing matters except for literally God. And it took a lot of reconstructing and rebuilding to realize that. So I just want to tell you like the after of coming to Christ is the most beautiful thing ever. It's a hard journey. It's not easy. It's scary at times. It doesn't make sense at times. But John, maybe 17. Let's see. I'm drawing a blank. However, I'm not even in the right book. That's why. Gosh. Okay, it's John 13. Sorry, I got it wrong. John 13, verse 7. Jesus replied, "You don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will." And that verse has popped up so much in my life with this journey of walking with Christ that I can't even describe it to you. Literally, like that verse has followed me around because I just never understood what God was doing until like surrendering my own plans to him. Like that was a big part of this testimony in my life is like, I've surrendered. Like that's the depth of it, is that I've surrendered what I knew to go walk in what God had for me, what I was comfortable with to see what God had before me, to like remove my plans from the equation and walk in the equation God had in mind. It just is so crazy because I thought that all these plans I had for myself were the best thing. To think the relationship I was in was the best thing for me. Thank you. Next. Just God was always there protecting me. And that is one of my favorite verses ever is like, I don't understand, but God does, right? So I don't know who this hit today, but I really want you to know, like, you are fully set free in the name of Jesus from anything you've gone through. You are a made new creation. You are walking in a new path with God. And to see that joy, like, I don't even want to ever push my faith on anybody, but tell them, like, you'll be missing out on the greatness of God's glory and everything he has for you because he turns everything around for your good. And Romans 8:28 talks about that. And I just believe that so deeply. And like my faith is so big because what God has done in my life, and mind you, like I live in a house still, I live at home, and it's constant spiritual warfare of living with parents who don't really know what my relationship with God is, don't really know my faith, and like walking in that is hard. And I really want to tap into that eventually of just like being raised in a household that doesn't keep God in the center of the home to a point where now like here I am, the one that's walking closely with Jesus and, being the spearhead of my family, hopefully one day that they can come to Christ. But it is a hard journey, but God is so, so faithful in all of it. And my trust is fully in him, because if he can turn that broken, lost, sad, jealous, bitter, resentful girl around to this made new creation in Christ, like he can do anything. He is capable of anything. I believe that deeply, and I'm so grateful I got to experience it firsthand in my own life. Thank you, God, for pulling me out of the trenches of what I thought was a great thing to a new thing, because God's always doing a new thing, to know what's actually good for me. Like, I seriously can't thank God enough for it. So I just want to thank you for being here. I want to end this on a high note, of course, that like the Lord loves you so deeply and wants to know you so deeply. So I pray that God is able to walk you through seasons of your life that you don't think are refining periods, that you think like the enemy is going to constantly get to you, or you think God maybe is against you, but God is so for you. And that's why you go through things like what you're going through. I just pray that over you in Jesus' name. And I just, I'm so excited for episodes to come where I can kind of unravel a lot more of the story that God had for my life and things he has going on right now. But that's it for right now. I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me of starting this podcast. It's going to be so fun. So continue listening up, and I'll see you on the next one. Mwah.